Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 33rd Emerging Growth Conference. I'm Anna Berry. I'll be your host today. As always, we have an exciting list of companies in a wide range of growth sectors presenting to you today. All of our conferences are uploaded to the Emerging Growth Conference YouTube channel, so subscribe, youtube.com/Emerging Growth Conference. Now, during each company's presentation, you can submit questions through the webcast module, and the presenters will attempt to address as many of these as possible at the end of their presentation. Today, we'll be running until 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And remember, when we switch to the next company, you're going to see a black screen for a moment, but don't go anywhere. That's just us moving over to the next presenter. If you do experience downtime for more than a minute or two, just refresh your browser and everything should work properly again. Now, our platform does work best on Google Chrome. So if you're watching from an Apple device, you have to hit the play button to start the session. And one last note, after today's event, you'll be redirected to the registration page for the next conference. So stay on or come back to reserve your spot early. Today, we have 6 companies presenting. So without further ado, I'll introduce our first. We have Awakn Life Sciences Corp, listed on the NEO exchange in Canada. The ticker is AWKN. And in the OTCQB in the US ticker, AWKNF. It's a revenue-generating biotechnology company researching, developing, and commercializing therapeutics to treat addiction with a near-term focus on alcohol use disorder. Coming in from Ireland, please welcome its CEO, Anthony Tennyson. Hey, Anthony, how you doing?
I'm very well today. Good to speak to you, and it's great to get the opportunity to speak with your audience today.
Oh, we're thrilled to hear about this important service. Please, the floor is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. So before I start the formal presentation, what I'd like to do is just briefly outline what I believe to make Awaken a compelling investment opportunity, particularly in light of the current market dislocation and because of our near-term catalysts. So as you kindly said, we're a biotechnology company, and we're researching, developing, and also commercializing therapeutics to treat addiction with a near-term focus on alcohol use disorder. We're focused on addiction because, unfortunately, there is such a significant unmet medical need. There's such a significant unmet medical need. There are, in fact, few people whose lives have not been affected by addiction. Looking deeper at alcohol use disorder, which is our primary focus, this condition affects approximately 400 million people globally, and the current standard of care is poor. Alcohol use disorder destroys lives and, unfortunately, in many instances, in fact, kills. And the current standard of care is inadequate, as I mentioned before. Current treatments deliver little therapeutic value, and there is typically relapse rates of about 75% within 12 months of treatment. And it's currently estimated that only 8% of people who suffer with that disease seek out treatment. However, there is a new alternative available. We have proprietary data-supported therapeutics with proven efficacy. Our phase 2B trial delivered 86% sobriety or abstinence in the 6 months post-treatment versus 2 months or 2% pre-treatment and a 25% current standard of care. So to put that in a different light or different context, people coming into our phase 2B trial, they were sober 7 days a year, so 2%. And after the trial, they were sober 320 days a year. That is a significant improvement. And now people suffering with this debilitating disease have an alternative treatment option. And so let's get into the formal presentation. So, as I said, we're a biotechnology company, and we're researching, developing, and also commercializing therapeutics to treat addiction with a near-term focus on alcohol use disorder. Our objective is to provide effective therapeutics to addiction sufferers who are in desperate need. And our strategy is to commercialize our R&D pipeline across multiple channels. We do 2 things in Awakn Life Sciences. We do R&D and we do commercialization. So in our R&D activity, we are developing combined therapeutics, so that's drugs and therapy, to be used in combination to better treat addiction. We've got 4 programs in our R&D work stream. Ketamine for alcohol use disorder, ketamine for behavioral addictions, MDMA for alcohol use disorder, and our own novel chemical or new chemical entities. And then in our commercialization activity, what we do is we commercialize or generate revenue from what we've developed in our R&D business. And we've got two commercial channels, clinics and therapeutics commercialization. In our clinics business, the purpose of that business is to build a platform to deploy the therapeutics developed in our R&D business. It's to generate clinical data to support interactions with regulators and payers in due course. And very importantly, it's to generate revenue. And that's really, really important for the audience today. We are a biotechnology company, but we've de-risked our company for investors because we are revenue generating already in our second financial year. And we've de-risked the business further by having multiple shots on goal, to use a European soccer analogy, in our R&D business. And the second one of our commercialization channels is to commercialize our therapeutics outside or beyond our clinics. And that will start by out-licensing our IP into the addiction treatment industry in the US, starting later this year and early next year. And to put that into context, there's 10 to 15,000 addiction treatment clinics in the US, and they generate about $40 billion a year revenue, and they have about a 75% failure rate for their treatments for alcohol use disorder. So the purpose of that third pillar of our business is to enable some of those 10 to 15,000 clinics to be better and more effective at a lower price point or a higher margin. And we believe we can enable them to do that. So we've been incredibly busy since we set the company up in 2020. And we've got a significant number of catalyst events coming down the track over the next 12 to 18 months. In the interest of time, I won't go through everything that we've achieved as a company since we set the company up, but suffice to say, we established the company, we acquired some R&D assets, we brought the company public in Canada and also onto the OTCQB in the US, and we opened some revenue-generating clinic assets. And very importantly, for today's audience, is what we've got coming down the track. So our near-term catalysts for the balance of this year, so in the next 6 or so months. And again, looking at this through the 4 R&D programs we have and the 2 commercialization channels we have, the catalyst events we have are, we've applied for a grant from the UK state to provide 66% funding for our planned phase 3 trial to use ketamine to treat alcohol use disorder in the UK. We have completed a phase 2B trial that delivered that 86% abstinence or 86% efficacy, and we published the results in January of this year. We have a phase 3 trial designed, which we hope will be a pivotal trial on the pathway to securing marketing authorization in the UK. And we've applied for 66% funding for that trial from the UK state. And we are reasonably confident that we will be successful in that grant, and we should have an answer in the next 2 months or so. If successful, the next catalyst event would be to initiate that planned phase 3 trial, which would be a pivotal trial in the UK, by securing regulatory and ethic approval for that trial in Q4 this year, and the first participants in the trial in Q1 next year. The second sort of set of catalysts for us would be to complete a larger gambling study. So we completed a study on a range of behavioral addictions. The approach that we take to treating addictions, it's pretty unique. We target the brain circuits that house the behaviors that drive the addiction. And that approach gives us the ability to develop treatments for both substance addictions and also behavioral addictions. And we believe we're the first company in the world to be developing drug-based treatments for behavioral addictions, which affect about 700 to 800 million people globally. We filed some patents on that, which, if successful, means we'll be the only company in the world able to commercialize ketamine to treat behavioral addictions globally. And so we've initiated a follow-on study on gambling disorder to validate some hypotheses. Other catalysts we've got coming down the year, or for the balance of this year, are to launch our out-licensing proposition into the US, again, accessing a large but underperforming $40 billion a year industry. and to continue to generate revenue from our clinics in the UK and EU and Europe. So strong catalysts coming down the track for the next 6 months, moving from phase 2B into phase 3 with 66% funding from the UK state to de-risk this for investors. Completing further analysis on gambling disorder, giving us a leading global position in the treatment development of drug-based treatments for that indication, and generating revenue across our 2 revenue streams. And as we get into 2023, I think the key catalyst for your audience today is our planned and targeted uplisting onto the NASDAQ at some stage during 2023. So these are the 4 key investment highlights that set us apart, I believe, from many other companies in the industry and make us quite an attractive investment opportunity. So there's a significant and unfortunately growing market opportunity for what Awaken does. So we're a biotechnology company, and we're researching, developing, and commercializing therapeutics to treat addiction. The market is significant. 20% of the planet suffer with a substance addiction, and hundreds of millions of more people suffer with behavioral addictions. The industry that is meant to be treating these people is large but underperforming, valued at about $100 billion a year, but with, typically speaking, a 75% failure rate with those treatments. So significant market opportunity. Second thing that sets us apart and an investment highlight for us is our deep revenue generating pipeline. So like I said, we've got multiple shots on goal or multiple opportunities for value creation across a range of addictions, starting off with substance addictions like alcohol use disorder and behavioral addictions like gambling disorder. We've got a lead phase 3 asset that de-risks our pipeline for investors, and we have developed that pipeline with a relatively low capital investment. And our clinics are already revenue generating, further de-risking Awaken for investors. Everything we do is supported by science and by data, and we have significant data, human data, with efficacy proven for our therapeutics with appropriate IP moats in place. And lastly, we have a very, very experienced team of global addiction experts punching significantly above their weight across the board and management. It is in fact a team that I have built for tomorrow, but whom is executing successfully for today. So how big is the problem and how big is the potential market? Well, alcohol use disorder, it affects about 400 million people globally. Gambling disorder affects up to 450 million people globally. Compulsive sexual behavior, which includes pornography addiction, affects about 350 million people. Internet gaming disorder and binge eating disorders, between 200 and 100 million people. There's a significant amount of capital or money spent every year in purchasing treatments for these diseases. In the UK public healthcare system spends $4.5 billion a year in treating alcohol use disorder related illnesses alone. And as I said earlier on, the US rehab and recovery clinics industry generates $40 billion a year in revenue. Neither of those are providing effective treatments for their patients or clients. So we have, as I said, we've got a deep pipeline with multiple value creation opportunities and with appropriate IP moats in place. For alcohol use disorder, which is a condition, as I said before, that affects 400 million people, for which the current standard of care is poor, but for which there is already a very large treatment market, we have a completed phase 2AB combined trial with efficacy proven that we are bringing forward into phase 3 with support from the UK state planned to de-risk this investment for investors. We already have, and we also have a phase 2A safety and tolerability study completed for MDMA for alcohol use disorder that we have a phase 2B trial designed and most likely next year will execute. We have a range of studies for those behavioral addictions completed, and we are progressing forward gambling disorder. And we are also, in a very cost-efficient manner, developing our own novel chemical entities. We like how ketamine works in our clinics, works in about 90 minutes, and it has been proven to be effective in the treatment of addiction, but also mental health conditions. And MDMA is showing promise, what we're learning from our clinics business is that MDMA can take quite a while to work in a clinical environment. So about 6 to 8 hours from starting a session to completing a session with a recovery window, which means what we're learning again from our clinics business is that people will most likely have to stay overnight, increasing the cost, different planning, different building infrastructure. So what we're doing with our NCE program, or our new chemical entity program, is we are looking to develop a proprietary version of MDMA that will work in 2 hours with a 2-hour recovery window. So delivering the benefits of MDMA in the same treatment window as ketamine, which we believe will be quite commercially valuable. So let's just look very briefly at our team. We've got a team with deep and strong track record across research, development, and commercialization, having come out of leading firms in the pharma, biotech, reg, academic, and corporate land, or corporate worlds. Very, very strong team across our board. Key one to call out here, Paul Carter, former Global Chief Commercial Officer for Gilead, which is about a $75 billion NASDAQ-listed company. Steve Page, former CEO of the Priory, which is the UK version of the Betty Ford. And lastly, Dennis Purcell, who we recently appointed as a special advisor to me as the CEO. Dennis Purcell is one of the most influential people in the US biotechnology industry, founder and chairman of Asling Capital, which is a $2 billion AUM biotech firm. Very strong management team. Key names to call out here, really Professor David Nutt, who is acknowledged as one of the top 3 researchers globally in the use of psychedelics to treat addiction, and Professor Celia Morgan, who is a world authority on the use of ketamine to treat addiction. David was the leader of that phase 2A MDMA trial, and Celia was the leader of the phase 2B ketamine trial. So just doing a deep dive, or just spending a few moments, I should say, doing a bit of a deeper dive into how we treat addiction and what sets us apart from other companies that are developing or have developed drug-based treatments for addiction. So you could view what we do in Awaken, in our R&D business, as being the third evolution in treating addiction. Evolution 1 was talk-based therapy. So the AA, it's admirable, but it doesn't work. It's got a 90% failure rate. Evolution 2 is drugs and therapies used in sequence. So say something like Vivitrol, it's a brand owned by a company called Alkermes, blocks the uptake for alcohol at a brain level. People take that to increase the probability of getting through detox and then into engaging in their 12 steps program. Works for some people, but not for all. What we've learned is that the brain gets knocked out of calibration by exposure to addictive substances and addictive behaviors. And there are, in essence, 3 levels to the human brain. There are the lower level parts of the brain, memory and reward prediction and pleasure. Mid-level, which is the driver part of the brain, and the upper level part of the brain, or the cognitive part of the brain, the mind. The analogy I use is that these lower and mid-level functions are kind of like the hardware, and this upper level part, it's kind of like the software. And what happens in an addicted brain is the hardware, or the software, loses control over the hardware. And so what we do is we use drugs to disrupt those brain circuits that house the behaviors that drive the addictions and disrupt the connections between those brain circuits. And then we come in with proprietary cutting-edge psychotherapy. And in essence, what we do is we enable our people to recalibrate their brain to get it back to a calibrated state after repeated exposure and long-term exposure to addictive substances and behaviors. And this approach is pioneered by Professor David Nutt and Professor Celia Morgan, who are on our team, and has been proven to work in phase 2A trials for MDMA for alcohol use disorder and phase 2B trials for ketamine-assisted therapy for alcohol use disorder. Very briefly, I'll just do a bit of a deep dive into the core pillars of the company. So on our R&D business, or the R&D business unit we've got those 4 programs that I mentioned before, and this is how they line up with the core pillars of the company. So ketamine for alcohol use disorder, ketamine for behavioral addictions, MDMA for alcohol use disorder, and our NCEs. For ketamine for alcohol use disorder, we have, as I said, that phase 2B trial completed, phase 3 in planning due to commence later this year with the support from the UK state. In the clinics, we're already commercializing the IP developed in that clinical trial. And we will start to out-license that IP to generate revenue from third-party clinics later this year and going into next year, giving us a fairly unique position as being a biotechnology company that's revenue generating across multiple channels in its second financial year. For ketamine for behavioral addictions, we've completed that small mechanistic study. We used the data from that to file some global patents, which, if successful, means we'll be the only company in the world able to commercialize ketamine to treat behavioral addictions globally. And we'll introduce those treatments into our clinics in 2023. For MDMA, phase 2A completed, phase 2B in the planning. And for NCEs, we've completed a hit to lead program. We've identified 2 series with drug-like properties that act the same way as MDMA does, but on completely novel scaffolds. And we will be working towards bringing that into lead optimization later this year, with the goal of being first time in human, so phase 1, in calendar year 2024. Getting into commercialization. So we have got 3 clinics operational today, generating revenue. Our target is 15 to 20 clinics. In our clinics, we treat people suffering with addiction, but also the comorbidities of depression, PTSD, and other indications. Each clinic can and will generate approximately 5 million Canadian top line and approximately 25 points of margin. So that means in due course, we will have a significant revenue engine inside our company, generating free cash flow at the business unit level that we will be able to reinvest into the biotechnology business in a non-dilutive manner annually. Therapeutics commercialization, where essentially we take what we do in our clinics and we license that out to third-party addiction clinics. We're going to start that work Q4 this year. We've hired the former head of sales for the Western region of the US for Vivitrol. He actually launched Vivitrol in the US and grew that from $0 to $150 million. So he's well connected into the US addiction treatment clinic industry. And we will be launching this business later this year and early next year. Just going into the cap table for a few minutes. Very clean cap structure, no debt, strong institutional support for investors. Our largest shareholder is OrbiMed, the well-known biotechnology investment fund in the US, and we have other significant institutional psychedelic investors. We have strong coverage from banking analysts, including Stifel, Wainwright, and Maxim. Very important slide here is how we stack up against our peers in the industry. If you see where we are from an R&D perspective, we are in the same position as Compass and ahead of MindMed, but at a significantly lower valuation. And we are in the process of bringing our phase 2B assets forward into phase 3, which means we will possibly be only the second company in the psychedelics industry in phase 3, along with MAPS. And we are working to bring our phase 2A asset forward into phase 2B. And we also have our own preclinical programs. And when you look at our market capitalization, I believe, based upon our investment highlights, our near-term catalysts, that there is a potential for value creation for investors in Awaken. So that's it for me. I'd like to hand it back to the presenter, please, for any questions, Anna.
Great presentation. Thank you so much, Anthony. Okay, let's jump in. Harold Phillips says, what are the top three catalysts for the company over the next 12 to 18 months?
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that question. So, and I apologize if this is a little bit repetitive, but for me, the top 3 catalysts for the company are progressing our proprietary therapeutics, our lead program, from phase 2B into phase 3. We have developed a combined therapeutic, so ketamine and therapy, proprietary therapy, used together in combination to treat alcohol use disorder, which is a condition that affects 400 million people and for which the current standard of care is poor. And we have delivered efficacy 3 times better than current standard of care with the phase 2B trial. And we're really excited about progressing that forward into phase 3. And to de-risk that for investors, we've applied for a grant for 2/3 funding for that phase 3 trial. And we would hope to have an answer on that in the next couple of weeks. Second catalyst for us is continuing to generate revenue for the business across our two revenue streams, our clinics business and then our licensing partnerships business, which puts us in a unique position of being a biotechnology company focused on developing proprietary therapeutics to treat a range of indications that affect many, many people, but also generating revenue. And I guess then the third most significant catalyst for us is our planned uplisting of our OTCQB listing, uplisting that onto the NASDAQ at some stage next year.
Right. Camille Norton, wants more details. She said in your presentation, how you speak about the market opportunity for more effective treatment for addiction is significant and incumbents are underperforming. Talk more about that, as well as how it relates to your key markets in the US and the UK.
Happy to do so. So unfortunately, the problem of addiction is a growing one. 20% of the planet suffer with a substance addiction, and hundreds of millions of people suffer with behavioral addictions. The current treatments are relatively ineffective. The UK, which is our home territory, the NHS, which is the National Healthcare Service in the UK, it's the second largest purchaser of healthcare services in the world, annual budget of $200 billion. They spend $4.5 billion a year to treat alcohol use disorder related illnesses with very little effect. They treat 50,000 people a year on an outsourced basis by essentially paying third-party companies to deliver alcohol addiction treatment services, and they don't work. So we believe we are primarily positioned to bring to market in the UK more effective treatments that are efficacy that's 3 times better than the current offering, but also can be delivered at a lower cost point because we're delivering it outpatient as opposed to inpatient. And then when you look across at the US, like I said, there's 10 to 15,000 addiction clinics in the US. They generate about $40 billion a year in revenue. And Anna, they don't work. They have a 75% relapse rate for alcohol use disorder. So what we want to do is, I guess, the analogy is you could view us as being the Intel Inside, or hopefully being the Intel Inside in the addiction treatment clinic industry in the US. And we're going to start that business later this year and early next year. So the market is significant, multi-billion-dollar industry that's highly underperforming. And so if people were looking around to see what industry warrants what's the next industry that warrants disruption, a large industry, multi-billion-dollar industry, valued at over $100 billion a year, where the incumbents are not innovating and are underperforming, and Awaken is looking to come in and disrupt that large but underperforming industry with proven, innovative, effective technology.
Makes total sense. Dan Yu wants you to explain how Awaken can create value and reduce risk for investors over the next 12 months.
Well, that's a great question. So my background is actually in risk management consultancy. I spent 10 years working for a company called Aon as sort of global head of strategy and operations for their risk consulting business. So I'm kind of, risk management is in my blood. So when we set up the R&D program for Awaken, what we didn't want to have was just one iron in the fire or one horse in the race. So that's why we've got multiple R&D programs in our R&D business unit. So we've got multiple shots on goal by having those 4 work streams. Ketamine for alcohol use disorder, that's significantly de-risked by having efficacy proven in phase 2B, moving into phase 3. Ketamine assisted therapy for behavioral addictions that affect hundreds of millions of people, for which there's no current treatments, with patents filed that could give us quite a strong, compelling position. MDMA for alcohol use disorder, and also developing our own NCEs. So we've de-risked the biotech R&D side of the business by having multiple shots on goal with appropriate IP moats around everything that we do. And then we've de-risked it further by generating revenue, by converting our IP into revenue at a very early stage for a biotechnology company. So that's how we've de-risked the business, generating revenue early and also having multiple shots on goal in our R&D business, or multiple bites of the apple in our R&D business. And then in order to create value for shareholders, well, you look at where our market capitalization is today, and you look at the fact that we've got a phase 2B asset progressing, our lead program is progressing into phase 3. And if you look across the biotech landscape, there are very few companies that are moving into phase 2B with efficacy proven for a condition that affects 400 million people with a current poor standard of care that have a market capitalization at ours because of the current market dislocation. So we've de-risked the business by having multiple shots on goal, earning revenue, and the value creation opportunity, we believe, is because of our team, our business model, our IP, and the maturity of our research versus our market capitalization, which has been negatively affected by the current market dislocation.
This is really fascinating stuff, Anthony, and super important stuff. We are out of time, unfortunately, but we've got tons of questions from our audience, and so we'll send them to you so you can answer on your own time. But please come back and join us again. We want to hear some updates about this really important company that you're heading up. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to have me. Anyone wants to email me, Anthony@AwakenLifeSciences.com. I'll answer your questions. Take care. Thank you.
All right, everyone, stay with us as we transition to our next presenter. We're coming right back.